Hi. Now, this is going to be a weird bit of filler. I know I say that sometimes, but this is definitely going to be the weirdest, most fillery of the weird filler. Main channel YouTube stuff is a little bit light right now because I'm actually working on a series. Well, actually, I have been doing a lot of other miscellaneous content, so go to the website. There's like half of the stuff that I've made recently is free, but there just hasn't been any main channel stuff. And I wasn't going to do any main channel stuff. I'm doing this series and I thought I'd put all my eggs in that basket, but then I found this script. See, it's not even, like, I haven't typed it up or anything, so it's really rough, but I thought it was kind of okay. I haven't really put the time in to really decide if this is what I think about things, and it's obviously the very first draft. There's a lot of unfinished stuff in here. But I thought I'd just have a crack at it now and it might be okay, because I mean otherwise there's no point ever coming back to this script, so I might as well just use it now. So I've made some notes in the margins and I'll just sort of try and edit it in real time and hopefully a video comes together. I have no idea how long this is going to be, how good this is going to be. The one thing that I did do to really add that level of polish to this video, I've lined up the sun back there exactly with the backlight. So in 2018, Arcane Studios released Mooncrash, a roguelike, time loop, immersive sim where you explore and uncover a narrative that will help you to escape the game for good. And then in 2021, they released Deathloop, and then I'll just reuse that footage. A roguelike, time loop, immersive sim where you explore and uncover a narrative that will help you to escape the game for good. And then ideally there'd be a sort of joke here, something like, oh, that's not a fair comparison. One is a insert hyperbolically negative opinion about Mooncrash, and the other is Mooncrash. Switcheroo. But anyway, I haven't written anything. You could go the other way. One is a hyperbolically positive opinion to have about Deathloop, and the other, oh, it's Deathloop. Gotcha again. Anyway, that's the pieces for a joke. You can independently come up with one yourself. Just imagine that I did that there. But it's not a fair comparison. They're completely different games made by completely different teams. Mooncrash, being a DLC, has the benefit of building on all of the mechanics from Prey, borrowing all of the assets from Prey, and Deathloop being a standalone game, while they can kind of build on what they've done before, a lot of it needs to be entirely made from scratch. So theoretically more freedom, but obviously higher overheads. Arcane is known for making immersive sims, which is a genre where the gameplay is emergent, it's based on the player using the gameplay systems however they want, and you uncover the narrative by stumbling on audio logs that everyone decided to start recording about 30 seconds before their death. Then I've written an example about emergent gameplay / Prey. Note, all different play styles. I don't really know what that means. So you need to get into a room, you could climb up and go in through the roof, you could hack the door, you could fix the door, you could turn into a coffee cup and roll in through a crack. Just every part of the game has so many different approaches to solve gameplay problems. And that expands out to be part of the combat. The combat isn't really high intensity shooting, it's more like strategizing and coming up with creative solutions to gameplay problems. So I loved Prey, as I've already talked about now, but I put off playing Mooncrash for the longest time. I've never been that interested in roguelikes, roguelites. I'll probably say roguelike throughout, but I understand that that's a very controversial thing to say and I should be saying roguelite. Hopefully my accent masks that and I slip under the radar. Anyway, I'm not really that interested in roguelikes. Whenever I played one of those games, I find it more annoying than anything. But I was pleasantly surprised by Mooncrash. It works really well for casual, short games spread over a 15 to 20 hour experience that are more rewarding than punishing. The idea is you have to get 5 characters to escape alien overrun moon base in a single run, but death is permanent until all the characters die and the simulation resets. But there's a lot more interest within it than just being a sort of sandboxy, repeated death simulator. It basically imports everything from Prey and then just builds on those mechanics or having that same style of environmental storytelling with an overarching secondary narrative which isn't quite as good, but it does work to make the thing a cohesive whole. All those 5 characters who you can control and, you know, get to escape are very limited in their skill set. So if you need to get into a room, only one character can hack their way in. Another one could repair the door, another one could teleport in, another one could transform into a mug. Or in combat, some characters are best to set traps or sneak around or avoid it entirely, use their powers, or just treat it as a shoot. And it's in this sort of persistent world where aspects about the world change, but the map is always the same. So when you play a traditional immersive sim, you make your way through and you solve the gameplay problems as they come to you. But you know, you can only solve each problem once. So even though the developers have factored in like there's 7 ways to reach this item, you're only going to see one of those in your gameplay. Where with Mooncrash, with the time loop thing and the, you know, getting each of the 5 characters through, you really get to learn and see how all of those different solutions to problems could work and where they're best suited. So in a traditional immersive sim, while it's cool that there are multiple paths, you're just really going to pick one path and stick to it. And the modern approach is that they give you basically all of the tools. By the end of the game, you unlock every single ability in the game, so you could solve any gameplay problem with any number of solutions. It's like a sandbox playground sort of thing. But with Mooncrash, with this limitation, you have to find that way out. You have to find a way to get this character to work. So it's sort of a bit more problem solving. It sort of forces you to master its gameplay from every angle. In a way that's really exciting and engaging. I'm gonna put this down for a sec. I'm gonna tell you about some gameplay that encapsulates this. So I was pretty early on in Mooncrash, and I just needed to get my last guy to escape, but I didn't know where anything was yet, and I basically completely run out of items. I haven't really leveled up yet. They'd been hit in the head, so they took damage anytime they did anything too physical, and I needed to get through a room of pretty tough aliens to get to the escape pod and get in and escape. But I had nothing, right? So I just had to sneak around, pick up like fire hydrants, throw them at an alien, then run away and hide. And eventually doing that over and over, finding enough crap to throw at them to thin them out enough to get through. I was able to get up to the escape pod, and then the escape pods had a shield up, and I didn't have anything that would disable the shield. So I had to drop a battery out of my inventory and shoot it with my last bullet, and then that electric shock disabled the shields for long enough for me to get in the escape pod and escape. And that's the sort of systematic gameplay that's in every immersive sim, but you just never have any reason to do it. And that sort of high intensity problem solving is really incredible. So I think mechanically Mooncrash is maybe the best immersive sim that I've played because it forces you to master it from every angle in a way that's really exciting and engaging. Now, the problem is the plot is basically nonsense. The writing and the dialogue is really pretty good. There's a lot of nice character stories to uncover. The framing narrative is okay, it's sort of generic, and then the explorational storytelling is really good. It feels a lot more open than Prey, and they managed to sort of drip feed you information all around this moon base. So throughout your gameplay, you're constantly learning more about what happened here, piecing together a puzzle, like learning the timeline and stuff. And I find that really engaging, and it's done really well here. Potentially even better than Prey here because it's so non-linear. Really, you could find out any of these pieces of information outside of the main story at any time. And it's just all really well written, so everything is a self-contained little interesting piece that ultimately sort of pull into focus this bigger picture of what the story of the game is, or what the background of the story of the game is. I think it's a really great way of doing that storytelling. It's a way of actually making story out of what is just like meaningless detail, and that's probably the thing that I like most about these games actually. But the story of Mooncrash is basically nothing. It's there, it does exist, but it's not really, there's no driving logic behind it or meaning or substance, and then awkwardly it just kind of ends, despite the fact that it's just sort of a loose narrative that's an excuse for emergent gameplay. Once you reach the end of that narrative, the game ends. Your save file's completed, you can't open it up again. Done. If you want to play more, you have to start over. And if I hadn't been dicking around so much, I can see that you would easily finish the game before you were actually done with it. So I think that's the most ill-judged thing about Mooncrash, is that actual narrative itself. But overall, pretty good. So that's Mooncrash. a bizarre little experiment, really, that actually works very well. I do think it does a really good job of introducing you to those immersive mechanics and giving you more opportunities than ever for those moments where it's like you, the player, did something cool. Now, while Mooncrash was in development, Arcane's Leon studio started working on Deathloop. And Deathloop has a great premise, you know, it's a time loop where the only way to break out is to assassinate 6 targets in one day. Is it 6? I can't remember. I think it's 6. Anyway, sort of a puzzle to try and figure out how you're going to make that happen. Now, the noted problem with that is that it's not a puzzle at all, it's a linear narrative which takes that premise from being an inspired gameplay hook to sort of a bizarre narrative gimmick. And then it's more of a shooter than a lot of immersive sims. It sort of strips away a lot of those mechanics, and it slightly de-emphasizes that explorational storytelling in favor of something that's maybe a bit more broad and accessible. The writing is quite similar to Mooncrash in that what is written well. The dialogue is actually really standout, it feels really authentic, the performances are great. You know, when it's trying to be funny, it's actually funny, which is insanely rare in games. But the narrative itself starts strong and then it really peters out. It just feels like they didn't know where to go with it. It never really escalates beyond its premise. I think there was room to do that, but for whatever reason, they didn't. And it feels rushed. I don't know that this is the game that they were aiming to make. You know, with that pitch of a reverse Cluedo assassination puzzle, I doubt they were thinking, yeah, this is a linear narrative multiplayer shooter. And it obviously had a delayed release. Apparently it changed a lot, and it's sort of awkwardly Sony exclusive that they started making before they were bought by Microsoft. So I think it probably just isn't the game that they wanted to make. It feels like half of a game. A really good half of a game, but just half of a game. And I think that's probably the main thing. It's just one of these games that got fucked over by financial circumstance. On the other hand, it feels very narratively uncreative. The idea is that in an alternate universe in the 60s, a wealthy hippie commune discovers an abandoned military outpost that was researching a time loop, and they decide to go there to find eternal life, only to get unknowingly trapped in their first day forever. It's only our protagonist and his nemesis that retain their memories. So it's a pretty good premise, but they don't really do anything with it. They flesh it out a bit, but really only enough to get it over the finish line. It doesn't feel like a complete story. And it has this 60s retro future aesthetic, which I think was part of the pitch as well. But that doesn't bleed into the story at all. There's no reason for that. You'd think there's maybe this opportunity to have these characters who are out of time looking at a 60s society from an outside perspective, not like doing deep cultural criticism, but just sort of a little bit of fish out of water or something. But they really don't do any of that. Weirdly, it does sort of try and say something where the sort of leaders of this hippie commune are sort of like entrepreneurial tech bros, which is like, I don't know, it's bizarre. It's like, that's not, it doesn't say anything, and it kind of feels like it's just disparate pieces that are randomly plugged in together. It feels like the actual plot doesn't inform the premise, the writing doesn't inform the plot. Every sort of aspect of that storytelling feels very disconnected and jarring. So it just has this messy narrative. You wake up one day and you suddenly start remembering that you're in a time loop, which you have done before in the past, but you forgot. According to the game, you forget you're in a time loop whenever you get bored, and you remember when you get brutally murdered. And this only applies to you, the player, and no one else. But the second part, the brutal murdering, applies to Juliana once. And the game builds that up as a big mystery that's going to be solved. But then it never is. And I mean, obviously you don't have to solve that mystery. You don't have to explain why the player started playing the game. Most games don't. It's brought up as this big mystery and then never resolved. Similarly, the game never resolves why Juliana is hunting you. Because it's fun, is the game's answer, but also she's bored and sick of you and sick of this world and 200 years old and just wants you to stop, which you will do if you escape the loop, but she doesn't want you to escape the loop. So you get to the end and the climax, and it's like these two well-drawn characters just dissolve into 2D representations of the plot. One thing that the plot does do very excellently is sell you on the idea of putting the game down right from the start. Mooncrash failed at this spectacularly, so Deathloop, right from the start, it really hammers into you. The goal of the game is to finish the game and then put it down, which is nice, especially now where every game, the goal is to keep you playing forever. It's nice to have a game that actually does drive towards a conclusion right from the start. Of course, the only problem with that is that it's also designed to be always online multiplayer. So the design of the game would seem to suggest one thing while the narrative is doing the opposite, and that's just where I feel like it struggles. Every piece feels tacked onto each other. None of it is bad, but it just feels like incoherent or unfinished. I think this isn't common knowledge, but the original pitch for Deathloop had it existing in the same universe as Dishonored, just 200 years later, which is kind of a fun piece of business to do. Obviously, it's sort of a jaded, transmedia marketing thing to sort of link your franchises together, but it is kind of nice, you know, you have these magical abilities in Dishonored, you update that to the 60s, now they're technological abilities. It is a nice little piece of storytelling, I think. Not incredible, but nice, and you can see how removing that from the game would cause some problems, and I think it was removed pretty late in production. The launch version of the game actually still had some references to Dishonored in there, and they patched that stuff out. So the final version of the game has this constant hinting at more expositional detail, a bigger mystery, but you never get that whole big picture coming together because it was removed. I don't know if they got cold feet because internally they were sure that the game was going to flop, or maybe it was a genuine creative decision to rip that stuff out, or maybe because this was going to be a Sony exclusive and they were now owned by Microsoft, it was a bad idea to sort of cross-brand Dishonored into their Sony exclusive. But obviously taking something from the original pitch of the game and stripping it out is just going to make for a less complete feeling game. So Deathloop is a fun little game. It's a little bit incoherent, but it's very polished and streamlined. It feels like a AAA game. While Mooncrash is a fun DLC that's basically the same size as Deathloop, and it does feel like more of a cohesive whole. It's maybe less polished in terms of, like, you know, streamlining the gameplay systems, and it's a bit maximalist, but I think it's overall a better, more cohesive experience. That's not to say, if you like the sound of Deathloop, I would also recommend Mooncrash. It's the better game, unless you really, really over-prioritize like good dialogue and VO over everything else in a game. Maybe being a little bit negative about Deathloop, but I don't think this is the Deathloop that they intended to make. This is obviously just the result of the hyper-commodification of games and blah blah blah. And that's all I have, really. Deathloop is just another result of an exploitative industry. The end. Yeah, that's the ending. I don't know. And see, that's probably why I put it down, because it doesn't really coalesce into anything. What a shame. But hopefully a successful bit of filler done. Check out the website for more content that would be better than this video, and keep an eye out for that pitch for the series that I'm going to do. Otherwise, thanks.